before in Wall Street. So I think he can share more experience with us. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Susu. What I'm sorry that we can't do, because there are so many of you. Usually when we work to help people on communication, there's a lot of give and take. But I would like you to, we'll stop every now and again, and I'll ask for your comments or your questions, and please do jump in and make your point then. But we'll have to manage it because we have limited time and we do have a lot to get through. And thank you to Ji Chao, who is helping on this as well. What we're going to do is take you through some of the basic ideas of what it takes to give an interview that makes an impression. People talk about, oh, you need to express yourself. You need to express yourself. Yes, we do need to express ourselves. You express yourselves through fashion. I express myself through words. As Susu said, I used to be a journalist. I was for many years a journalist with the Wall Street Journal. Before that, with Reuters, and then with other publications. But expressing yourself is fine. But I don't know if you've ever expressed yourself on a mountaintop or in front of the ocean. If no one's there to hear you, it's fine to express yourself, but you're not making an impression. And what I'm going to try and do is to try and show you how to, using words and body language, and sheer enthusiasm, how to transform your expression into making the impression you need to make. So let's go into this media training now. Chao, can you flick the page? Okay, we don't need to know all about that. This is the word that there are two words I'd really like you. Spoiler alert! I'm going to give you the answers to everything now. If you retain two words from this next hour and a bit, the words I'd really like you to retain are opportunity and preparation. Opportunity, because when you're faced with somebody who's asking you questions, a journalist, it's an opportunity for you. Enjoy it, use it. It's not an interrogation. It opens doors for you to take the journalist where you want them to go, and always be willing to talk to journalists to seize that opening so that you can make the most of it. And the second word, that's not just word, the second concept that's really important, and again, you all know this because you work with your hands, you have to prepare. You can't just walk into a fashion show and say, oh, I'm going to improvise this one. It's not, even jazz, improvised jazz, you still have to prepare because you have to know your stuff. And same too with speaking. Don't just think you can go in and, as we say, wing it, play it off the cuff. Prepare. Before you're going to cook a cake, you've got to think about, have I got the ingredients in the kitchen? Same thing. If you want to seize that opportunity of an interview, you need to prepare. And we're going to run through some of the ways to do that. Why is this such an opportunity? Because for you, the Shein X program is really a huge break for you, because it's bringing attention and it's giving you a platform. Let's move on and have a look at what that means. As you know, it's an incubator. You've been picked because you are emerging designers, and because Shein believes in you as tomorrow's successful brands. And this is really an opportunity to put you on the stage and give you that access. So what we're doing is not just the catwalk, but also when you're talking and telling your story to the journalist, to make the most of that. Moving on. It's all about discovering. So what I hope a journalist will get, and I got it reading your 25 biographies, this feeling of wow, this is tomorrow. This is tomorrow today. I'm discovering something. I discovered a lot of fascination with the 90s, fascination with the 70s, this feeling of bringing fashion to many people, of being inclusive, all sorts of things I discovered as I was reading, and this idea that you're using your capacity to create and design to bring something to people. It's really powerful, and all thanks to Shein for helping you get there. Moving on. It's good to have just a few numbers in your head, just in case. I do stress that the journalists will be looking for your stories, but your stories are now part of the Shein X story. So it's good to have a little sense of who they are and what they are. This idea that Shein X has brought together over time, since last year, they've worked with over 1,500 designers, and you are part of this very select group that are being propelled into a much bigger opportunity. They've paid out to designers, as they say here, 1.5 million, and that this is generating business, 30 plus new drops each month from people like you. Moving on. It's already generated a lot of media. So, and again, here I'm talking about Shein, not about you, Shein X, but you are going to be surfing this wave. So it's good to know about the wave that you're going to be surfing. It has generated a lot of interest. As you can see, newspapers from all different countries have focused on this, seeing that it is a way of showcasing young and not so young, or talent of all ages, but that is emerging talent. Moving on, particularly in France, and you'll be talking mostly to French journalists. There are some British journalists who will be coming. I'll show you just now the names of the publications, so you have a sense of that. Here, these are the French media. As I say, there are some British ones coming as well. I'm not sure about other countries. I don't know if you know about any of these, but if you want to know more about them, you can. The best thing would be to ask Shein or ask my colleague Marion Bouchu, who will be with you on the 20th. And you can always ask her. I think we have a picture of her, maybe on the next page. Yes, that's Marion. She can't be with us today, but she'll be with you on site. So if you have any questions about Shein or Shein X, or any questions that go beyond you, feel free to reach out to Marion, or even to direct the journalist to Marion. What we've done here is we've jotted down some of the likely questions. Don't focus too much on this at the moment. We're not going to try and give you answers, but this is just to give you a taste of some of the things we expect that they might like to talk about. What I'm then going to do is then take you through the way to prepare. But this is just to give you a taste of the sorts of things that they might be asking. I think because there is already interest in Shein X, and Shein is a well-known name, obviously they'll be wanting to know how you and Shein work together. And they'll probably be asking some business questions, some creative questions, some personal questions. As you can see here, did they come to you? Did you contact them? How has this helped you? Tell us more about the masterclass. Who's getting the money? What's the property rights? These sorts of questions are the likely questions you're going to be getting. Don't feel that you have to give what would be the word? Scholarly answers. If you have any doubt, you have Marion, who can give you information about Shein. What I'm going to be showing you as we go through the tips and techniques for interviews is the importance of taking the question as an opportunity, as a springboard to go to where you want to go to tell your story. And we'll look at how to do that. So, for example, if you get a question like, what's one of the questions here? Who gets the profits from the sales? Feel free to talk about how you are going to be building your business and, you know, the money that you're going to be getting and how it's going to help you grow your business. You don't need to go into business stories. You can go back into creativity. For example, if you get a question about what you've learned from this partnership, talk about yourself. Feel free to talk about yourself. If you get a question about shein and plagiarism, there have been issues about this. Don't feel you have to go into a legal thing. Talk about how you feel about working with shein and how they're helping you, and how I hope you have a relationship of trust with them. Don't feel you have to answer every question. The next slide, I think we've reached the end of that section. So that's a very brief overview of the context. So before we go into tips and techniques and tactics, let's just stop. And does anybody have any questions?
No.
If you have, either put up your hand, you know, that little yellow hand that you can put up, or just start talking. If not, I'll carry on. Okay. So what we're going to do, I call this impression, I always call it expression impression, because the one without the other makes no sense. If you make an impression and you haven't tried to express yourself, you haven't controlled the impression. And if you're expressing yourself and haven't thought about the impression you're making, you haven't gone the full way. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at this in three parts. The first part, if we move on to the next slide, the first part is the importance of preparation. The second part will be actually during an interview, some of the things you should bear in mind. And the third part will be dealing with questions, how to deal with questions, and some of the other aspects like dealing with stress and things like that. But really, what's so important is to sit down. We don't have to sit, you can stand, you can walk, and think about what you're doing. Why are you meeting this journalist? What do you want that journalist to retain? Next slide. A way that I use, but there are many ways of doing this, it's not rocket science. I use and I do this, even if I've got 3 minutes before talking to someone, I sometimes sketch my little house. They call it a message house. It's a well-known technique. And it helps. I work more visually than conceptually. And so I like to see a little picture. It helps me. I don't like using bullet points. I get confused where, you know, what was where. So I like this technique, but there are others. You can do it as a tree. You can do it as a journey. Many ways of doing it. The basic idea here is to think about the impression you want to make, the big idea that you want to leave this person with. This person, the journalist, we hope, is going to write an article. But this journalist is talking to you, but he or she is also talking to others. And there's no guarantee that they're going to write your story. There's no guarantee that they're going to write an article about you, because why should they care? What do you bring? Does the journalist care that you've always loved fashion? It's not very original. So you want to think a little bit about what's the most important thing when a journalist walks away. What would be the typical headline? What would be if the journalist is going to quote me saying one thing, what would it be? Before I started this session with you, I thought, oh, I always get nervous before doing these things. I've done them for many years. I thought, oh, I've got to get across this idea of opportunity, because sometimes people think it's a challenge. They sometimes think it's an interrogation. I've got to get across this idea of opportunity. So my headline message to you is opportunity. I want you to walk away with that idea of doors opening, of springboards. There are many ways of expressing opportunity. Potential, a road, an avenue stretching away to the horizon. And that's the idea I want to leave you with. Before you talk to someone, think about what that would be. You don't want it just to be a slogan. You want it to be an idea that's a little bit original, perhaps, maybe a little bit surprising, but something that resumes really what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, or what you have achieved. And then so that goes in the top, in the roof of the house. But then underneath that, you've got to sustain the conversation. Obviously, they're going to be asking questions, but questions are just, dare I say, opportunities. Questions are invitations to talk a bit. We do it when we say, "Hi, how are things?" Do I care how things are? No, I'm just offering you a platform to talk to me about what you want to talk. And a lot of the questions will be like that with a journalist. Journalists, I speak from experience. A journalist comes into an interview. He doesn't exactly know what he's going to write, he or she is going to write, because he's fumbling around, he or she is fumbling around looking for something interesting. By definition, you don't necessarily know what it is. Some of them do. Some of them are coming looking specifically for something. But often they're just, oh, so tell me something interesting. So we need to prepare that. We need to prepare something interesting. So in my little house, I have 5 rooms. I suggest that one limits oneself to 5 rooms. 5 rooms being 5 themes, 5 topics, 5 aspects. I suggest you limit it to 5 because that allows you to keep what I call manual memory. First point, second point, third point, fourth point, fifth point. That way you don't need notes, you can remember them. And what are these? So in my case, when I'm talking to people about how to go into an interview, it might be under the big headline message is every interview is an opportunity. But then I might have my rooms. One of them might be my history, where I've been, what I've done, and my experience, let's call it experience. My second room and so in that room of experience, I'd want to talk about interviews I've done in the past, how I felt when I was going into an interview with the President of the Republic. The second room might be the press. It might be something broader. The third room might be about writing. Why do I like writing? Why is writing important? The fourth room might be about the future of the media. I'm making these up as I go along. In your cases, each one of you is going to be different. It might be your inspiration, where you find inspiration. Again, I'm making this up. I'm not telling you that you have to do these. What I'm saying is create buckets, rooms, where you have things to say. So looking at your biographies, a lot of you talked about your inspiration. A lot of you talked about your experience, who you worked with, where you worked. A lot of you talked about the materials you use and you like to use. A lot of you talked about your what does a designer call someone who wears their clothes? Their client, their clients, their muses. I don't know. Yeah, let's call them your clients. The people who wear clothes, the people for whom you are doing this. What is your vision of them? Some of you talked about your ambition. There already, we have 5 areas, 5 rooms, 5 buckets into which you could sort out your thoughts. Let's use those as a working what's the word, as a template. Again, sorry. Again, I'm not saying you need to do this in this particular way, but it gives you something to fall back on, and you can always find something to say. We said inspiration. What did we say? We said what was the second one we said? Can anyone remind me? We said your clients. We said materials. We said your ambition. Your experience. Your inspiration, your experience, where you've worked already and what you've already done. So there, if someone's interviewing me and I get a question, I should just think, oh, would I take this question and lead it in and plug into my, where I get my inspiration, or shall I take it more about how I see my clients and what I'm trying to do for them and how they wear my clothes, or shall I throw it forward into the future about where I see my brand going and how it's going to grow? What I've done here is just sorted out my thoughts a little bit so that I can plug into that and have something to say. We'll come back to this later in the third section when I talked about dealing with difficult questions. If you've prepared something, you can improvise. If you haven't prepared, you can't improvise. Think about going into the kitchen. If you've prepared your cupboards, you can improvise a dish. If you haven't prepared your cupboards, you can't improvise a dish because there's nothing in the cupboard. It's as simple as that. At the bottom of the house, I have two levels. One is it's like the foundation. It's not necessarily the part that you want to be making very visible. You want the theme and your big idea to be the most visible thing. But I put your personal credibility. When I started talking, and Susu did it herself very kindly for me, you might say, well, why am I listening to Charles? Who's this guy, Charles? Why should I listen to him? What's his credibility in this? And so I mentioned, oh, I worked for the Wall Street Journal, and that helps me get across to you early that I've done this before, that I know what I'm talking about. I hope. It's not boasting. It's just trying to establish a little credibility, because the message that you bring is only as credible as the messenger. If I ask my young daughter, what's the weather going to be like in California tomorrow? She won't know. If I ask the weatherman, or I go to the Weather Channel, then I'll get an informed answer. I have more respect, because I think, oh, that's got credibility. That's a silly example that I've given, but the idea is that somewhere, without boasting too much and without delivering a CV before you speak, just make sure that you say something that establishes your credibility, that you know what you're talking about. Now, it might be, I don't know, the number of suits you've already made. It might be the number of years that you've been working. It might be the name dropping somebody you worked with. It might be showing that you went to some school. Just bear in mind, and I don't mean to say this cynically or pessimistically, but the world is a cruel place, and many journalists, many people, have that little question at the back of their head always: so what? So what? So you start talking and they're sort of sitting there, and they may not say it in those words, but you've got to get over the barrier of so what? Why should I listen to you? Why should I care? Why should I care what you're telling me? So we need to always just bear that in mind. You don't want to overdo it, but just, if you can, establish your credibility. And then your institution's credibility. I always say this to clients. I have clients who work for big companies, small companies, who work on their own. If you have an institution behind you, in your case, it's partly shein X. You might use that. The fact that you've been selected. Why is shein X credible, and why does it add to your credibility? Because it's, they've picked you out as a talent. So you might just say, I'm making this up, and I'm not saying you should say these things. These are all just examples. But you might say, how exciting it was to be picked as one of the talents, one of the laureates for this program. Amongst the 1,500, it's really it's quite a small number in the world of fashion, and so this gives you this opportunity, and blah 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 blah. Off you go. You've just established your credibility by talking about the fact you were selected for shein X. In this case, the journalist will know, but sometimes, as Susu said, this what we're doing here is not just for the 20th of September, but going ahead in the future. Always think about how to ensure that your credibility is there, is a foundation of credibility for anything you say. Let's move on to the next page. So using this template, the idea is that you stock it up, as I said. So you should think about, and you can write this down even. Again, you don't have to, you can write down, you can just have it in your mind. But I find it helpful to write it down because it helps my memory. And in the rooms, the real point in the rooms is that you should think about anecdotes, facts and figures, anything that illustrates the credibility, or not the credibility, the vividness of what you're saying. So if it's in the room number 1, which is about your inspiration, a lot of you talked about, or some of you talked about the 90s. That's fine, you can mention the 90s, but what would be a nice anecdote? What would be a nice image from the 90s? Would it be Oasis? You know, you heard Noel Gallagher playing, whatever he played, when you were sitting on your sitting on a swing, if you're that young, and you realized and you saw this whole world open up of rock music or it was the 70s and you know, illustrate what it was, the colors of the shirt that Andy Warhol was wearing in a picture that you saw, and you realized that there was a whole world out there. Make it visual, make it tangible. Just saying the 70s is a concept. Try and go beyond a concept and give something tangible so that the journalist isn't just hearing the words, but is picturing what you're picturing. That's why I say facts, figures, anecdotes, timelines, anything that brings to life what it is that you're trying to get across. When we talked about those 5 rooms, each one was a bit of a concept: inspiration, experience, materials. Try and use those rooms. I try and picture them as rooms. So I would, in that room about inspiration, I would hang a portrait. If I'm the chap who's doing it from several of you, or a couple of you, in the 70s, I might hang a portrait. I picture that room. I can picture that portrait of Andy Warhol. I can picture one of those, you remember those psychedelic lamps? One of you mentioned them. I might have, I don't know, David Bowie, because he was the 70s. He was other things. Sorry. Shush. Sorry, I have dogs. So try and bring things to life. Try and make them visual. Let's move on to the next slide. So this is a summary of what I've just been saying. I won't go through this again, but perhaps you have some questions or observations on what I've just been saying. Does anyone have any objections to what I've been saying? No? Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. This is really important. I did mention this issue. I'm just going to close the door because of those dogs barking. I beg your pardon. Sorry. Always remember, I'm going to say something now which makes no sense at all because I'm doing exactly the opposite. But try and avoid a monologue. Because if you can't, it's the wrong thing to say, touch and feel, but if you can't get a mental grip of who you're talking to and what they're all about, you're going to be just talking for yourself. And there we run into that sort of so what problem. So you have to try and make the journalist, you have to try and put yourself in their shoes. I don't know if you've noticed, I've been trying to do it, you guys haven't been very, you haven't spoken to me, but I did read your, and I understand why. That's not a reproach. So I read your brief bios in order to try and get a little bit of a sense of who you are, because I want to try and see the situation through your eyes, what you're looking for. In the same way, with when you're talking to journalists, make an attempt to make what you're saying relevant to them, and that could be a reference to something that they might know, or ask them if you know where they were in the 70s, for example. Assess their age before you do that. You may want to, before you meet them, you may want to find out how, you know, what's their area of interest. Are they more business? Are they more creative? Have they already written about other designers perhaps that you know about and you could refer to? Just something to establish a personal contact so that you can use the word you. A conversation without the word you in it is probably going to be something of a monologue. So if you can have some sense of who you're talking to and engage that person, you will do a better job of bringing them with you to where you want to go. Marion can help you on this. On the 20th of September, Marion can help you because she will know who you're meeting. You can also do it just by asking the journalist a little bit. You want to do that carefully because you don't want to make the journalist feel uncomfortable. But the basic idea that I'm trying to get across here is be aware that you're talking to somebody. You're not just talking to a wall. Let's move on. So we're going to go now, unless any of you have questions or points to raise. Always give you the opportunity. Yes.
Hi, I'm Lucy. Nice to meet you.
Hi.
Well, I do have a question regarding to when you said about approach to the right approach and how to get to know the journalist. My question is, isn't it like very overwhelming and very rude approach when you will just try to understand who is a journalist and how to basically get to know the journalist? Yeah, isn't it rude approach from the designer when it's they trying to interview you and it feels like you trying to interview them?
Yes, that's an excellent point. That's why I said you don't want to overdo that. So don't interview the journalist. Very good point. Don't interview the journalist. Ask Marion a little bit about the journalist. You know, whoever set it up. You could ask Marion, who could give you some background, or just as you're talking, you have a sense. Sorry, let me just deal with this. 1 second. Sorry, as you're talking, use the word you. So that you have some sense of give and take. But I totally agree with you that you don't want to interrogate the journalist to find out, because it sounds aggressive. It sounds as though you don't accept who they are. The story is you. Obviously, the story is you, and you must take the conversation where you want to go. The point I'm trying to make is, when you're talking to somebody, have as much of a sense as you can that you are talking to that person, talking not at them, but talking to them.
Okay, so just keep the conversation casually and like try to have like a contact. Yes, I understand. That's the point.
Yeah.
Just to keep it casual and try to
keep it casual. Yes, it's not necessarily casual. It's professional. So you don't want to be too casual. My point is more that to have a sense that the journalist who's coming in is not just there to take notes. The journalist is there to be interested in what you're saying. So you want to engage the journalist, and that's one of the first point I'm going to make in this second part. Are ways to do that.
Okay.
So I'm glad you raised that question. I think it's a very good question. And maybe I expressed it too bluntly. As much as possible, and this is true of life, I think, is empathy. Try and put yourself in the shoes of the other person. Now, there are ways of doing that, and you don't want to be aggressive. People tell me sometimes that I ask too many questions of my children, my nieces and nephews. They say, "Oh, Charles always asks such earnest questions," and that can put people off. So your point is an excellent one. So don't go too far with what I'm saying, but just be aware that you are talking to somebody, and acknowledge that.
The other question I did have, I don't know if is it relevant to the topic right now we're going through, but like because I've been previously interviewed, and when you're being interviewed, the idea is in your head, oh, I don't want to push hard, I don't want to talk too much about myself. How we basically can keep this part and these ideas away, because when you're being interviewed in your head, it's all going, oh, if I will talk too much about myself, they will think I'm very selfish. Oh, they will think I'm over talking. Oh, all these are things which is in your brain when right before you starting interview till the end, and that's like literally starting to squeeze your brain too much. So how to get rid of this? Really?
Clearly, you have one of those what I'd call a good problem, is that you're smart and you think a lot. Maybe you think too much, or you analyze a lot. What I would recommend is exactly, if I can use your question to go into the next part, because it really answers, I think, it answers what you're saying. If we go to the next slide, in order to engage the journalist, I'll come back to that. I see someone's asked a question. Can I deal with this for Lucy, and then I'll come to that question that you just asked. One way of doing what you've just said, talking about yourself without sounding self-obsessed, is to make your story part of something bigger. What do I mean by that? Your story as a designer, your story as a creative person, your story as an entrepreneur, your story as a fashion professional, your story as a young person, they're all parts of a bigger story. If you think about it, we're all illustrations of some aspect of society. And so if you're talking, let's say you're talking about, let's go into one of the rooms. You want to talk about your where you get your inspiration. That was the first room. Well, you'll have some very personal things, but if you can make those personal things and you can situate them as part of in a bigger context, in a broader context, that would be understandable to the journalist, then the journalist is going to relate to that, and you can talk about your influences as part of some bigger thing. So let's say we talked earlier about influences from the 70s. You could talk about the evolution of society, or the changing morals of, the way the morals were changing in the 1970s, for example, and the revolution that was going on. Then the revolution, the cultural revolution that was taking place. And that allows you to talk about your influences and yourself, but as part of a bigger story. Other ways of doing that, you could talk about yourself as part of so you can talk about yourself as part of a demographic, your age group. You can talk about yourself in relationship to where you come from. You can talk about yourself in terms of the style in which you work. Maybe you're more of an impressionist or an expressionist or a deconstructionist. I'm not sure the the words in the fashion world, but in the art world, you know, you can put yourself in within a trend. So basically, my point in answer to your question is, you should talk about yourself because you are the subject, but you could put yourself, you can make yourself an illustration of something bigger, and that will give your story more relevance for the journalist. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question, Lucy?
Yeah, it does. It does partly answer the question.
All right.
Yeah. The idea is like just to start from where you came and squeeze into the fashion. Like it's basically merge two words into one, so it will not sound very much self-concentrated. So let's take, let's say, taking a bit of my where what I did, who I am, and merge into a fashion world and carry on in a fashion. So that way it will sound less self-concentrated, right?
Yes, it makes you an example of some bigger phenomenon.
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
It would be that. Now we have a question from Eva. Can you please give concrete examples with casual but professional conversation phrases? I'm Italian. I need it since we have. Eva, can you talk, Eva? Where's Eva? Eva?
Here. Hi.
Hi.
I'm outside, so I don't think I can talk. Sorry.
You can't speak?
Yes, I'm outside, so
okay.
Yeah.
Eva, I'm not going to give you examples because that would mean I would be writing what you need to say. But casual but professional. The way we're talking now, and you heard Lucy asking me a question, I would say that was, I don't know if it was casual. I mean, we are professional. We're in a professional context now. But the tone of what we're saying is quite relaxed and informal. But I think we are being professional in that. I'll come to that next question later. We're being professional because we are taking the conversation. Well, I'm trying to take the conversation to where you need to go. That is more important than the exact words. It's more this sense of, in a professional conversation, you're not just talking about the weather and then let's talk about a movie we saw. You have a sense of determination of where you're going. And this ties in with what I was saying before. Your preparation, you prepare those rooms, for example, if you use that technique, then you know where you want the conversation to go. You know that by the end of the conversation, you will have used the opportunity of those questions to get across the story of whatever it is you've decided. In my case, it would be this idea that anything that comes along is an opportunity. It would be this idea that for every opportunity, you must be ready, therefore you must prepare. Those are my key themes. Those are the ones that I'm going to come back to all the time. So I'm not going to say, here's what the way you should phrase it. I mean, the way we're talking now is casual but professional. So any phrase I'm using is the sort of phrase you can use. We're talking directly, but more than the use of the words, it's more the mindset behind that makes our conversation professional, because I have a very defined aim of where I'm trying to go. So advice on what not to say would be helpful. Can we hold that question and we'll come back to it at the end, because we're going to look at difficult questions. But what I will say now, Bora, is don't say, basically, talk for yourself. Don't talk for Shein. If you get a question about Shein, you can say, oh, you can talk about how you're working with shein. That's your story. But if it's a business question about shein, then ask them to talk to Marion. Marion will be there with you, and she will deal with that. In the third section of this presentation, we're going to look at how to deal with difficult questions and when you should, how you can deal with difficult questions, including when you shouldn't answer. So let's come to that later. So during the interview, yeah, always try and paint a bigger picture. Your story is interesting, but each one of us, you know, we're 1 in 8 billion people. Each one of us is insignificant. We're little tiny people. But each one of us is actually really important because we're part of something bigger. And what is it that we're part of that's bigger? In my case, why am I part of something bigger? I'm part of a bigger idea, which is I really want to help. And what I do every day is I try and help people express themselves in a way that will help their career, help their business, help their relationships. To get not just clarity, but efficacy in the way they talk. And why do we need that? Because we're in a world where there's this welter of words and communications, but then it's not targeted. So that's my bigger story. It's not my story. It's the bigger story of which I am part. So always remember, you're a part of something bigger. And if you can situate yourself in that, you're giving the journalist a reason to talk about you as an illustration of something that's much bigger. If you would, we could do it with Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci is interesting. He's really interesting because he is such a good example of what the Renaissance was. Who else? Henry James. No, never mind. He's too obscure. Shakespeare was a very interesting guy. But he was really interesting because what was he doing? He was bringing theatre to the masses. So there was a sort of democratization going on in the 17th century Britain that was fascinating, and so on. You make even the most famous people are part of something bigger, and you are part of something bigger. So work out what it is that you want to identify yourself with, and you use that as a wave to surf on, so that you can talk about yourself. And you can get the journalist to talk about you as something that is meaningful. Moving right along. I hope that's clear. Moving right along. Can you turn? Thank you. We could talk for hours about manners and how to be. You can all have a copy of this, so I'm not going to go through it line by line. I'm going to just give you the ABCD. This amiability, it comes back to my idea of opportunity. There's no reason to feel nervous. And if you show nervousness, then you're going to make the other person uncomfortable. So as much as possible, welcome the idea, welcome the notion, welcome the opportunity of talking to someone. Keep a smile on your face. Not too much. You don't need to be sort of American, oh, this is awesome, fantastic. But we are professional, but we're casual, so we greet and we welcome. And even when, and we'll come to this again, and this will help. Bora, you asked this question about dealing with what to say, what not to say. This idea of keeping an open, welcoming attitude. Again, it doesn't have to be a false smile, but just your attitude, an open face. Use your eyebrows. Eyebrows go up and down, and that shows that you're interested and engaged. And even when it's a really difficult question, you can say, wow, that's a really difficult question. I'm so glad you're interested enough to ask me a difficult question. You don't need to say all that, but the attitude must be, oh, you go towards it and you welcome the opportunity. Brief. I'm not being brief. I'm talking much too much. B is for brief. Keep a control. We come back to Eva's question about casual but professional. To be professional, keep a sense of where you want to go. And when you've made your point, stop. It's very difficult to do. naturally, here I'm talking to 25 of you, and so this is pretty much a monologue. But if we were sitting around a table and there were 5 of us, not 25, 3 of us, I'm sure you've had this experience, all of you. Conversations are chopped and cut off, and people interrupt, and often, if not almost always, we don't actually finish a sentence because somebody comes in and says, "Oh, that reminds me," or "What about?" Or and so we're very used to, in social situations, we're very used to give and take, and we don't punctuate the way we speak. We don't put a full stop because we're afraid of silence. And I would urge you not to be afraid of silence. This is part of the professional aspect. When you've made your point, be amiable. Again, you don't have to have a big smile, but open. When you've made your point, stop. Don't keep on talking. If you've managed to give the answer you wanted to give, or take the conversation where you wanted it to go and make a point, something to do with your clients, your ambition, when you've made it, stop and allow the person to ask another question. It is a professional conversation. It's not just a casual give and take conversation. It's a professional interview, not just a casual conversation. So when you've given your answer, allow the journalist to come back to you. Don't be afraid of a silence. The journalist might not even be looking at you. If he may be taking notes, he or she might be looking at what the next question is that they want to ask. There's nothing wrong with just stopping and waiting for the next question. Where people get themselves into trouble and possibly get themselves into trouble by saying too much, and this comes back to Mora's question, is that they feel I'm frightened of a silence, so I just kept on talking because the journalist didn't say anything. It's up to the journalist to have a question. When you've made your point, like I've now made my point, stop. The third point is clarity. Now, in your case, the journalists talking to you probably know the fashion industry pretty well, and I doubt that there's that much jargon. But you want to just be aware if you use names. For example, you may mention a designer that you've worked with, and you think that the designer you've worked with is very well known. Keep an eye on the person you're talking to see if they recognize who you're talking about. Or you could even say, do you know, I don't know, do you know Mora Fabiana, famous designer from wherever you're from, Mora? And keep an eye on whether the journalist gets that. If you're talking about a material that you use that's perhaps not very well known, make sure that they know what you're talking about. As a journalist, and I know because I did this all the time, journalists don't know everything because nobody knows everything, and journalists cover a lot. And sometimes they're very specialized and they really know their subject. Sometimes sometimes they cover lots of different industries. Sometimes they cover lots of different subjects, and they may not know as much as you know about the design world. And so you may mention a school that you went to, or you may mention, as I say, somebody you worked with. You may mention one of your celebrity clients. You want to just make sure that they understand what you've said, because otherwise you've wasted your reference. D is for determined. This comes back to what Eva raised as the casual but professional. Know where you're going. You know that you have certain stories you want to tell, certain points you want to make. You've prepared beforehand, so you've worked out that you have. In this case, we did our template as a working model with this idea that you wanted to talk about your inspiration, your experience, your materials, your clients, and your ambition. Make sure you've made those points, you've used those points. And you can use any question to get there. Because you start to answer and then you lead the conversation, as we do in any conversation. You can lead it to where you want to go. Any questions on that? Let's move on to the next slide.
Sorry to interrupt, Charles.
No, good.
There's another question by Maura.
Ah. Oh, sorry, I didn't see this. So do you think... sorry, I didn't see these questions. I think advice on what we've done that. Do you think journalists in Paris will already have information about us before interviewing? Good question. Yes, they will have on the press release, there is your biography. It's not terribly long, it's about 10 lines long for each one of you. It talks about how you started, your inspiration, and then it talks about your actual creations. I'm sure the shein team can give you a copy of that. I expect you actually contributed it to them. So yes, they will have some information. And will they have read it? Different question. And to go back to I think it was Lucy's point, you don't want to interrogate the journalist and say, well, have you read my bio? No. Consider that they probably have read it, but they may not have. So here we have from Francesca. So if I understand right, talking to a journalist seems like talking to someone new you've just met. Be friendly and interesting, not talking about ourselves too much, not oversharing too much, and trying to do the best impression of us that we can do. Yes, the only bit I would not agree with, not talking about ourselves too much. It is about you. It is about you, so don't be afraid of talking about yourself. But this comes back to the point I was making, that we can talk. One way of talking about ourselves and one way of making our story interesting is making it part of a bigger story. So if you come from a certain region, if you come from a certain era, if you come from a certain school of influence, each one of those, if you're using a certain technique that no one else is well, the few other people are using, or just a few people are using, you can, but you think is growing in importance, you can make yourself part of a bigger story. This is the surfing analogy, that you go further if you ride a big wave. And show empathy, right? Yeah, showing empathy was what I was trying to say with putting yourself in the journalist's shoes. Again, don't overdo it. Don't overdo it, but that's true of everything in life, isn't it? But just, it's empathy. It's be aware you're talking to someone. When I was a journalist and now working as a consultant, I know people. I know it in casual conversation as well. People who just talk at you, and you feel that you're sitting in a wind tunnel, and this person talked at me, and never gave me a chance to engage. And as if they were just expecting you to take notes. That's not the point. And so we come back to Francesca's point. It is like a conversation. You're talking to someone new. You need to be interested and interesting. Don't overdo the interested, because you don't want to be prying. You are the one that's being interviewed. But having that sense of empathy, having that sense of you're talking to someone, putting you into your conversation will help. Any other questions at this stage?
Yeah, I do have a question again. Sorry for too many questions. So we talk about, you represent about, there will be topics that we will speak about, but the journalists might not know. So this is like a very tricky, as how we can approach, what question we can give, or how we can challenge to a journalist that we will understand if the journalist is aware what we're talking about or no. Because in my mind, I think like during the interview, asking do you understand, or do you know, or it makes sense, these questions is kind of rude. So what is the best way to understand if the journalist is engaging with us and is actually in a topic where we are talking about or not?
Again, a very good question. I would say by just keeping an eye on the journalist, watch the journalist. I mean, I'm sure you have a cousin, a brother, a sister, or someone who is intelligent, but in a different field from you, and you talk to them about what you do, and you'll see at a certain moment that they aren't getting it. And you, in the same way, when you're talking to a journalist, you keep an eye on them, and you can see when someone is not following. I agree. You don't want to be rude and say, "Do you get that? Do you understand what I'm saying?" That's aggressive. But as you're talking, again, we come back to the empathy. We come back to this openness. You keep an eye on the journalists. You can see when people are following you or not. I wouldn't overthink that one. It's something we deal with every day in our everyday lives. We're always talking to people and assessing where we position our register of communication.
Is there a way that you can bring into a conversation? Let's say if you understand that the journalist is not engaging because, let's say, you mention a name and that you work with, or you mention the company, or you mention some specific event which has been in a fashion industry that the journalist doesn't know, but it makes a big role or a big part in your life, and you want to mention it, but the journalist doesn't know and doesn't engage, how you can bring journalists into the specific topic, not being rude? Yeah,
without being rude. Again, probably the way you would if you were talking to your cousin, or who's not in the fashion world. You explain it. So maybe there's what would it be? A fashion show you took part in Milan, or a designer you worked with in Milan, and they don't, and clearly the journalist doesn't know that name. Would that be a good example?
Yeah, let's say, or even celebrity you work for, which doesn't has to do anything with the fashion world. Let's say from the sport world. Yeah, he's coming from the sport world, or I don't know, or whatever. And you want to mention it because it takes a big chunk of your personal statement, and you want to highlight it because that's going to make yourself to look more professional. So sure. You mentioned the name, and let's say the person doesn't know it, journalist doesn't know it, just because that's not specifically what he's dealing with, yeah, or she's dealing with. So how you can bring him into the topic that, like, I don't see that it is going to be right to say, oh, I work with this person, do you know him?
Sure. So you need to explain who they are. So if I say, oh, I interviewed, well, so I mentioned Henry James just now. Does anyone know who Henry James is? Probably not. So I would say, as soon as I said Henry James, I thought, that's the kind of thing that people who study English literature would know, but fashion designers probably don't know. He's a 19th century novelist. He was an American, and covered that moment where lots of young American women who had lots and lots of money were coming over to Europe, and European aristocrats who had no money left were marrying these women, and he wrote about all of that. So what have I just done? I've talked about a novelist who, have you ever heard of this novelist? Probably not. Why he came to my mind, I can't tell you. But what did I do? I tried to situate him as part of a bigger phenomenon. The money that was coming from in the late 19th century from America into Europe, and all those tired aristocrats who needed money were marrying these young American women, like Churchill's mother. So what have I done? I've tried to situate a reference that I had by making him part of showing that he illustrates something bigger. So if your celebrity is an Italian baseball star, is there such a thing as Italian baseball? I don't know, but an Italian baseball star, and you mention his name, and the guy says, who? And you say, oh, he's a big star, and somehow you situate him. You can say, oh, he's making baseball popular in Italy, or he's a big star and he has a big contract with Coca-Cola for their advertising. Something to position him in the same way you would if you were dropping a name to your cousin who doesn't know about the sporting world or the fashion world, and you would just explain who they are. But again, keep an eye on the person, and you will see if they're getting the references. You can see it. When someone doesn't understand, their head goes like this, or their brow furrows, or coming back to Eva's point, show some empathy. Keep an eye on the person, and you'll get whether they're getting your references. And if not, you just explain who they are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, let's move on. The body language. This first thing to say is the way you are is just fine. Don't think, oh, I'm terrible with my hands. Don't think, oh, my nose is too big. Don't think, oh, I'm always fidgeting. It doesn't matter. Each one of us is different. There is no single way to be. You are who you are. Enjoy it, if you can. So please don't think that there is one way to be. There is not. I do this with my hand all the time. That's not right or wrong. It's just the way I do it. So don't work yourself into, oh, I should sit on my hands. I shouldn't sit on my hands. You go to you go to dinner parties and hang out on the beach with people all the time. You're in social interaction all the time, and the way you're dealing with your hands then is just fine. So don't stress it, okay? However, that being said, maybe a contradiction, make an effort to look engaged. Lean forward. If you're always, if you close yourself off, look at yourself from outside. I think the best way to say this is look at yourself from outside and what are you projecting? And you don't want to project arrogance. You don't want to project hostility, because why would you want to do that? You want to project enthusiasm. You want to project openness. You want to project intelligence. You want to project creativity. And you want to take the journalist with you because you have a mission. You want to make an impression, and you've worked out what that impression is that you want to make. So you've got to get there. This comes back to one of your points about casual but professional. So to get there, make sure that your body is projecting that. Because what's this little chart there? This is the results of a survey that a group of academics did in the US, where they measured, don't ask me how they measured, it's the kind of thing academics do, seems to me a bit of a waste of time, but they measured how effective a message was when spoken, according to the body language, the tone of voice, and the words. And so I could say, I'm really enthusiastic. And the enthusiasm, I've told you that I'm enthusiastic. What's wrong with that? I've just told you I'm enthusiastic. I've just told you I'm enthusiastic, okay? So what comes through? What comes across? I used a tone of voice that wasn't enthusiastic at all. It was aggressive. And you will hear that more than you will hear the words. And so will your journalist. They will see, I'm really happy to see you. I'm really, really pleased that you're here. What do you see? You see body language that's aggressive, and it doesn't tell you, it's telling you that I'm not happy to see you. Don't overthink this one. It's funny. I think it's funny that the academics actually try and measure this thing in scientific ways. It's so unscientific. But the point is a good point, that it doesn't matter what you say if it's contradicted by the way you say it. That is the point you need to retain. Let's move on. This is a very important point. I hope everything I've said is an important point. That an interview with a journalist is professional. It is casual, but it is professional. One of you asked the question. Who was it who said it? Eva. And that professional relationship that you have with the journalist begins from the moment you meet them, and it continues until the moment you don't see them anymore. And in fact, it even continues after that, because they may come back and ask you questions. And as such, you should always be aware of that. You've got to, you can't suddenly say, oh, well, that was great, it's over. Whew. Hate what I do. Or did you see that other designer? You know, that will be part of it. So don't allow yourself to start chatting freely, thinking that it's over and your relationship has changed. Your relationship with the reporter never changes. It is always professional. Keep that in mind. There are many people that say, oh no, I've got good friends who are journalists. Maybe, but if they're writing about you, beware, because they will use that. And something you say about a competitor, a client, a supplier, it's all material for them. So you're always on duty. Remember that. And there are one or two others. It was Lucy. You're very worried about being rude to the journalist by being too curious. It's also, journalists don't like, I'm speaking now for myself, they don't like the idea that they are there to serve your purpose. That is not the way a journalist sees their role. They see their role as to tell a good story, to tell a truthful story, to tell an objective story. They may put themselves in as, you know, there may be an element of taste and an element of opinion, but nevertheless, they feel that they're bringing a story to their readers. So don't say things like, oh, thank you for that article, it was fantastic, you know, it really helped me, because that's not the way. They don't see themselves as writing your press release. They see themselves as writing a fair story. The best compliment you can give a journalist is to say something like, well, your article was tough but fair. Then they'll feel that they've done a good job. They're not there to help your career. We want, because we are being manipulative and calculating and professional, we want to use this opportunity. We want to use this interview as an opportunity to further your career, to further your visibility. But that's not the way the journalist sees it. The journalist sees it as telling a good story, telling about something that is worth knowing, that the readers will find it worth their while to know about. So treating the journalist too much as an ally goes against the way a journalist sees their own job. A journalist is a professional and is writing articles for his or her audience, his or her readers. So don't think that you can say, oh, what do you think? Well, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? The journalists, some of them may, and in the fashion world, I'm talking now for myself, I never liked that, because I didn't see it as my role. I saw my role as a role of objective observer, the anthropologist of whatever I was covering. I was coming in to see what was going on, find the big trends, find the interesting things coming up that would make a difference to other people. I never, and it was terrible, the idea that I would ever be writing something to serve the purpose of the person I was writing about. So beware of that. Does that make sense, what I've just said?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's now I think that's the end of the, yeah. So there we got to the end of, we've now looked at, we have 15 minutes left. We've now looked at how to prepare and the importance of preparation. We've looked at this idea that when you have an interview, it's an opportunity. It's not an interrogation. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to take someone where you want them to go. We've looked at some of the things you need to bear in mind when you're actually with someone. This idea of being open, of engaging them, of situating your story as part of something bigger, so that you can surf a bigger wave. What I'd like to look at now are just some of the trickier bits. And I don't think on the 20th, I don't think you're going to have aggressive questions. You probably won't even have difficult questions, but as your careers develop, as your brands soar, I hope you will become subject of more and more interest, and people may start getting critical and may start wanting to know more about the business and where it's going and who your clients are, etc. So let's have a look at that on the next page. So I talked about the need to create this message house. The French, there are some French people here. The French have a lovely game for little kids called the chat perché, which means, basically it means the cat in the tree, the cat up in the tree. And the basic idea is that when you're a little kid, the kids run around, and the person who's trying to catch you, there's a safe haven. It'll be a tree, it'll be a pole, it'll be a part of the playground or something, and you say, chat perché, which means I'm the cat up, out of reach. I'm the cat in the tree, so you can't reach me, I'm safe. And that mentality is what we need to have when you're, once you've established your message house, because there you're safe. If you can get the conversation into one of your rooms that you've already prepared, you've got lots that you can talk about, and you can keep the conversation going. So when a journalist comes with a question that you're not very comfortable with, there are various things to do. And that's what, and this is this idea of the safe haven rooms that you've already prepared will be useful for that, as you will see on the next slide. So I'm going to show you 4 things to do when you've got a question that you're not very comfortable with. First thing to say is always look as if you appreciate the question. The more difficult the question, the more you should lean in. Don't step back. Don't. Lean in before you even start to answer. And you can actually buy yourself some time by saying something like, wow, nobody's ever asked me that before. Or, you know what, people ask me that question every day. Or, you know what, I was thinking about that just yesterday. Or, what a fascinating way of seeing it. Whatever you do, and this is a remark about the dynamic of a conversation and basically psychology, I suppose. You want the journalist to feel that you are comfortable, because if you go, you've lost it, because the journalist feels they've won something and they've spotted some weak spot and you don't know what it is that you really want to say. Whereas if you say, oh, what an interesting question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. It reminds me of the time, blah, blah, blah. And you with a couple of phrases, you already give yourself a little opportunity to think. And now the first of the 4 techniques. Give yourself a little time to think by saying something welcoming, friendly, open, blah, blah, blah. You haven't answered the question. You don't need to answer the question immediately. You can reflect upon the question. You could pick up on one of the words. When he says something about a celebrity, you say, well, interesting, because celebrity is, what a big word that is. Wow. So many different levels of celebrity. I haven't said anything, but I'm just giving myself time. to think. First technique is to bridge back to your talking points. This is the safe haven I was talking about with the cat, the chat perché. You want to find a way to take the journalist back into one of those areas that you're comfortable. So it might be you want to talk about the way you use materials. So let's say there's a tough question on overconsumption. You know, you're producing more and more clothes. All you designers, you just churn out these clothes, and you know, do we really need more clothes? And you'd say, oh, that is a very important question. I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago where this question was raised, and there was a lot of discussion about it. I'm glad you raised that question. I haven't said anything, but I've been thinking, which room should I go into? And I think I'm going to go into the materials room, and I'm going to talk. And so I'll say, the thing about overconsumption is, of course, what we're using for the fashion. And so that's why we're very careful with my brand. We're using recycled materials, or that's why with my brand, I'm working very closely to make sure that the supply that I'm getting is as sustainably shipped as possible, whatever. And then I'm in there and I say, and recently we've been working with a new taffeta, blah, 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 blah. And I start talking about that, and I take the conversation back into my materials room. So the idea here, and we could be talking about this for hours. I'm going to move quite quickly, but the idea is you use a question to go back to where you want to go. You always welcome it. You never say. I was working with someone the other day who I asked him a question. It was about, he works in consumer electronics, and I was pretending to be the journalist. I asked him a question about inflation. He said, that's not a question at all. That's not a question. So I immediately felt aggressive because he was telling me I was an idiot. I don't think I'm an idiot, and I don't think the issue of inflation is I think the issue of inflation is very important, particularly when you're selling goods like that. But he told me I was being stupid. What do I conclude? He's uncomfortable. I must push on this one. So you don't want to tell them that it's not an issue. You want to acknowledge that it's an issue. So one way or other, acknowledge that it's a good question. And then, if you can, go to one of the rooms that you've prepared. Second, we got to move fast now. Second is to recalibrate the question. What do I mean by this? If somebody asks me a question about, I use sustainability, you could recalibrate the question. There are three ways to recalibrate a question that are very easy to do. One is in time, one is in geography, and one is in scale. So if, for example, I get the question about overconsumption, and the journalist is asking me specifically about, you're encouraging young teenagers to buy more and more and more. I could recalibrate that into, this is your question is a very, very interesting one, and really it concerns the entire industry. And off you go talking about the industry, and you throw it to the industry rather than keeping it just for yourself. You could recalibrate it by saying, this is an issue. You can recalibrate it geographically. That's really an important point you're raising. And here in France, I could see why you asked that question. I'm working with markets where actually I'm bringing clothes to people who don't have very much. I'm actually, for example, I'm selling into, I'm making this up, selling it to Nigeria. And there I'm bringing access to things that they didn't have before. So you shift the area of focus from one country to another, or from one region to another. And the other is over time. Somebody asks a question that you're not very comfortable with, and it's focused on today, and you open up the timeline, and you either project it into the future or you project it, or you take it back into the past. So if we use again that difficult question about overconsumption, you might talk about how our target is actually within 5 years to be recycling 90% of of the materials that or the 90% of the materials we're using will be recycled, blah blah blah, and you project in time. So you recalibrate the question. Somebody asked me a question I don't like about me. I turn it into a question about journalists. Somebody asked me a question about what I'm doing today, and I answer about what I've done over the last year. Somebody asked me a question about what it's like working in France, and because I'm based in France, and I turn it, or what do I think of French politics? I don't want to answer that, and I talk about international politics to avoid talking about Emmanuel Macron, and so I turn it into a broader issue. 3 ways of doing it. If those 2 points, 1 and 2, are based on the idea that a journalist is probing, looking for some interesting story, and isn't necessarily determined to get a specific answer to this specific question, but is using questions as a way to get you to talk because he or she is looking for an interesting story. That's not always true. It's often true, but it's not always true. And they may come back and say, wait, I asked a specific question and I want to know what percentage of your materials are using recycled materials. And they really want to know that. You've tried to lead them back to a broader point. You've tried to recalibrate it. They come back and they really do want an answer to that. You could buy time. And the way to do that is, if you don't have the specific answer now, or you don't want to give a specific answer now, you either say, you know what, it's a good question, an interesting question, and I can get the answer, and I'll come back to you. It gives you time. I'll come back to you, leave your email address, and I will send you a note, but then you have to do it. Or you can buy time by saying, that's not really something I can answer, but I understand why you're interested. But I could get someone else to answer for you. In this case, on the 20th, you could say Marion, who will be there. Marion can answer those questions because they're questions that you can't answer, about shein or about the event, or where you're not comfortable answering it. So that's a way of buying time and delegating. And the 4th way, and we're coming now to very much to the end, is you can refuse. However, when you refuse to answer a question, treat the journalist as somebody intelligent and reasonable. And so explain why you can't answer. There will always be a reason. It might be a question of confidentiality for your designs. It might be a question, or a financial question, where you can't talk about the finances because that's something that you don't publish. It might be a legal issue. It's in the hands of the lawyers. You're in a dispute with another designer, or that's in the hands of the lawyers. So I can't answer because. So it's okay to say no. If you say no because there you're appealing to their reason, and you're telling them why you won't do it, and therefore you won't. But if you just say, I'm not going to comment on that, so you've got something to say, but you just don't want to say it. Why not? Whereas if you say, I'm not going to comment on that because it's a very sensitive issue and I don't want my competitors to know what I'm doing. Okay, I understand. So there's no point in coming back, because you've given me the reason. What's the next slide? In 2 words, if you're in a crisis, and this is for later in life, always show compassion, always show you're doing something, and always show a willingness to be transparent. I'm not going to say more on that. That is when you have big brands and you run into a crisis, call me and we'll work on crisis communications. And the last one is how to deal with stress. Read those when you're sitting somewhere I think we're going to send them all these slides to you. There are many ways to deal with stress. The first thing and the only thing I'll say is it's okay to be stressed. It's okay. It's okay to be nervous. It's actually a positive thing. It shows you care. People who don't care are boring. People who, a little bit of stress, a little bit, can be adrenaline. A lot of stress can be debilitating, and there are some techniques that you can use. Feel free to read it and follow up on it. We're coming to the end, so let's take any questions. That's just a summary. Any questions you have? No questions. Well, I'm going to be watching on the 20th. I hope, and so I hope I'll see you. Here's my face. Come and say hi. Please prepare, think. And preparing can be sitting in your corner just thinking. It can take 5 minutes, it can take 5 hours, it can take 5 days. But just think about what you want to achieve. Think about the impression that you want to give. Thank you, Mel. And someone else has sent something, I think. No, someone else is writing now. And the most important thing to say is good luck and enjoy it. Enjoy. This is, for you guys, it's pretty damn exciting. You're going out on the world stage. Not with me, you're not having a practice. We'll go and talk to Marion. She won't have time to practice with all 25 of you. But do sit and think about what you want to say. And if you've done your preparation, you'll be fine. You'll be fine because you have something to say. Good luck. And keep me posted on your future careers. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.